All right, hello. My name is Dominic, or Mr. H, as my students call me. You'll have to apologize if I look down a little bit. My notes today are on my phone, as my computer is not wanting to let me do split view today. So I'm here to talk about one of the most important things I learned in Purdue's special education program, course EDPS 56800. And this would be the difference between entitlement versus eligibility for services for individuals with disabilities. This issue is especially pertinent to me, not only in my role as a special education teacher, but also in the job that I do at night, which I'll go into detail on a little bit later. So just a little spice for you there. So let's start with an understanding of our terms. So the short of it is entitlement means an individual is legally required to be provided designated services. So if you're classified with one of our 14 categories of disability, then we in public education are required to provide you these services. And if we do not, then there will be consequences for us. Eligibility means an individual may be qualified for these services using those 14 categories of disability, or even something qualified under a 504. So it could be related to health issues, right? However, these services are not automatically provided. So the individual then must advocate for these services. They then need to be evaluated for them and then granted said services. And they can actually be denied these services. So this can be based on funding, staffing, or any number of factors can actually prevent them from them being given these services. It can be something as minuscule as failure to complete paperwork on time or to renew paperwork, things like that. So how does this kind of shake out for our students? What does this look like later on down the road, right? So once a student is in the early childhood system of education, so think pre-K or even before, so kind of as soon as they're designated as falling within one of those 14 categories of disability, they then become entitled to services under the Individuals with Disabilities Act, right? So this includes things such as FAPE, SDI, LRE. Those acronyms will be defined in the comments below. Accommodations, modifications, auxiliary services, so things like OT, PT, speech, transportation, and transition planning. So transition planning is kind of central to this whole entitlement versus eligibility conundrum, right? All right, so then we move on, right? So they leave us in public ed. Student moves on to post-secondary education, the workforce, just think life beyond 12th grade, right? So once they leave us, adulthood, if you will, right? So then they fall under the coverage of the Americans with Disabilities Act and Section 504, right? So legally they can't be discriminated against. However, they lose that entitlement, right? So these services aren't just automatically given to them. So now they're eligible for services, right? So that means they may qualify, but they're not just being given these services, right? So the burden for acquiring services then falls largely on them. So whereas before they had numerous legal safeguards and external advocates, now it's falling to themselves or maybe a legal guardian, right, to kind of advocate and acquire these services for them, right? So now we're gonna go all the way back to that night job I mentioned earlier, right? So at nights, I actually am an armed security guard, and a common job that I work on is for City Parks and Rec. So this involves just going around, mostly locking doors, locking facilities, bathrooms, things like that, telling people the parks are closed, and I frequently encounter members of the transient populace, right? Mostly just conversations, right? I'm really just there to keep everybody safe. And I love to talk, so I talk to just about anybody. And more often than not, it comes out that I am a special education teacher. And surprising almost no one, a good majority of these transient people that I talk to end up telling me that at some point in their education, they actually were in resource classrooms. So they were receiving these services. So they were entitled to these services, right? And what I see here and hearing their stories, like so many of them are well equipped with the skills needed to elevate themselves from the current predicament they find themselves in, right? To no longer be considered members of the transient population. Like they have the skills necessary to enter the workforce, to to be quote unquote productive members of society, which is not to say that they're not already, because I hate that kind of stereotype, right? Many of the individuals I meet help me out all the time, and they provide a lot of services to us that go unnoticed. But anyways, that's a conversation for another time, and the purpose of this video is not for me to lobby Congress. But that is to say that if they received the level of support that they were receiving when they were entitled to services that they now no longer receive because they are only eligible for services, this would be a much different story. And most often is the case, the only thing preventing them from receiving services as they are now is bureaucracy and red tape, right? It's hurdles that we as individuals that may have never been entitled to services and may not be eligible now, right? We may not meet those conditions. Construct, right? Like we construct these barriers, and to us it seems very apparent how to navigate them. But in fact, it's not that simple. So that's why I think out of this course, out of EDPS 56800, the difference between entitlement and eligibility is probably the most important takeaway, and it's something that I really hope that people taking this course really kind of think further on and kind of keep in the back of their mind and kind of always keep present, especially when it comes to the transition portion of IEPs, and we really think about how we're setting our students up to navigate life once they lose this entitlement, right? Because that's kind of the last chance we get in public education to have a lasting impact on the life of these students. And it's an uphill battle from there. Once they're out of our hands, advocacy falls almost entirely on them and their guardians. And if we haven't equipped them to the best of our ability, we could potentially be setting them up to fail. So definitely the most important takeaway, definitely an area that us as a society need to continue to work on. And yeah, that's some food for thought. So that's what I'd like you to think on as you continue to watch these videos, or as you move about your life, or whenever you have a stray moment. So thank you for watching.